Hello, my fabulous dream chasers. Welcome back to my channel. It has been so long since I have done a speaking video to you guys. Because I've been mostly posting music lately. So, alright. Today, I'm going to be doing something different on my channel. You guys voted that it would be a good idea on Instagram, and here it is. Sorry, So, we're going to be reading Nancy Drew. And obviously, we're starting from the beginning of the series. So, I'm reading Nancy Drew, number 1, Secret of the Old Clock. And the book is written by Carolyn Keene. If you don't know, the whole series that I have is written by her. And for those of you who don't know who Nancy Drew is, she is an 18-year-old amateur detective. She goes around the world solving mysteries, and the company Her Interactive created a Nancy Drew game series based off of the books by Carolyn Keene, and I am absolutely in love with both. So, the way this is going to work is that I'm going to be reading about 1 or 2 chapters every video until the end of the book. Let's see, there are... How many chapters are there? $19? $20. There are 20 chapters in this book. So, 2 chapters each video. That would be 10 videos in all. So, let's have me stop rambling and let's get started with Nancy Drew, The Secret of the Old Clock. Chapter 1. The Rescue. Nancy Drew, an attractive girl of 18, was driving home along the country road in her new dark blue convertible. That's weird because in the game series, it's a blue roadster. She had just delivered some legal papers for her father. It was sweet of Dad to give me this car for my birthday, she thought, and it's fun to help him in his work. Her father, Carson Drew, a well-known lawyer in their hometown of River Heights, frequently discussed puzzling aspects of cases with his blonde, blue-eyed daughter. That's also weird because in the game series, they made her a redhead. Smiling, Nancy said to herself, "Dad depends on my intuition." An instant later, she gasped in horror. From the lawn of a house just ahead of her, a little girl about 5 years of age had darted into the roadway. A van turning out of the driveway of the house was barely 50 feet away from her. As the driver vigorously sounded the horn in warning, the child became confused and ran directly in front of the van. Miraculously, the little girl managed to cross the road safely and pull herself up onto a low wall, which formed one side of a bridge. But the next second, as the van sped away, the child lost her balance and toppled off the wall, out of sight. "Oh my goodness!" Nancy cried out, slamming on her brakes. She had visions of the child plunging into the water below, perhaps striking her head fatally on a rock. Nancy leaped out of her car and dashed across the road. At the foot of the embankment, she could see the curly-haired little girl lying motionless, the right side of her body in the water. I hope Nancy dared not complete the harrowing thought as she climbed down the steep slope. When she reached the child, she saw to her great relief that the little girl was breathing normally, and no water had entered her nose or mouth. A quick examination showed that she had suffered no broken bones. Gently, Nancy lifted the little girl and, holding her firmly in both arms, struggled to the top of the embankment. Then she hurried across the road and up the driveway to the child's house. At this moment, the front door flew open, and an elderly woman rushed out crying, "Judy! Judy!" See, and there's a picture of Nancy in the van, and the little girl on the wall. "I'm sure she'll be all right," said Nancy quickly. The woman, seeing Nancy's car, asked excitedly, "Did you run into her?" No, Judy fell off the bridge." Nancy quickly explained what had taken place. By this time, another woman, slightly younger, had hurried from the house. "Our baby! What has happened to her?" As the woman reached out to take Judy, Nancy said soothingly, "Judy's going to be all right. I'll carry her into the house and lay her on the couch." One of the women opened the screen door, and the other directed, "This way." Nancy carried her little burden through a hallway and into a small, old-fashioned living room. As soon as she laid the child on the couch, Judy began to murmur and turn her head from side to side. "I believe she'll come to in a few minutes," said Nancy. The two women watched Judy intently as they introduced themselves as Edna and Mary Turner, great aunts of the little girl. "Judy lives with us," explained Edna, the older sister. "We're bringing her up." Nancy was somewhat surprised to hear that these elderly women were rearing such a small child. She gave her name and address. Just as Judy opened her eyes and looked around, seeing Nancy, she asked, "Who are you?" "My name is Nancy. I'm glad to know you, Judy." "Did you see me fall?" Nancy nodded as the child's Aunt Mary said, "She rescued you from the river after you fell in." Judy began to cry. "I'll never, never run into the road again. I really won't." Or, "Really, I won't." Sorry, I read things wrong sometimes. She told her aunts. Nancy said she was sure that Judy would... See, I'm doing it again. Nancy said she was sure that Judy never would. She patted the child, who smiled up at her. Although Nancy felt that Judy would be all right, she decided to stay for a few minutes longer to see if she could be of help. The child's wet clothes were removed and a robe put on her. Mary Turner started for the kitchen door. "I'd better get some medication and wet compresses for Judy. She's getting a good-sized lump on her head. Nancy, will you come with me?" She led the way to the kitchen and headed for a first aid cabinet, which hung on the wall. "I want to apologize to you, Nancy, for thinking you hit Judy," the woman said. "I guess Edna and I lost our heads. You see, Judy is very precious to us. We brought up her mother, who had been an only child and was orphaned when she was a little girl. The same thing happened to Judy. Her parents were killed in a boat explosion 3 years ago. The poor little girl has no close relatives except me and Edna." "Judy looks very healthy and happy," Nancy said quickly, "so I'm sure she must love it here." Mary smiled. We do the best we can on our small income. Sometimes it just doesn't suffice, though. We sold some old furniture to the two men in the van you saw. I don't know who they were, but I guess the price was all right. Mary Turner's thoughts went back to little Judy. She's so little now that Edna and I are able to manage with our small income, but we worry about the future. We're dressmakers, but our fingers aren't so nimble with the needle as they used to be. To tell you the truth, Nancy, at the time Judy's parents were killed, Edna and I wondered whether we would be able to take care of Judy properly. But we decided to try it, and now we wouldn't part with her for anything in the world. She's won our hearts completely. Nancy was touched by the story. She knew what was in the minds of the Turner sisters. Living costs would become higher, and with their advancing years, their own income would become lower. Unfortunately, Mary went on, Judy's parents left very little money, but they were extremely bright people, and Judy is going to be like them. She ought to study music and dancing and have a college education, but I'm afraid we'll never be able to give her those things. Nancy said reassuringly, Judy may be able to win a scholarship or get other financial aid. Mary, finding Nancy a sympathetic listener, continued, A cousin of our father's named Josiah Crowley used to help us, but he passed away a couple of months ago. For years he used to pay us long visits and was very generous with his money. Miss Turner sighed. He always promised to remember us in his will. He loved little Judy, and I am afraid Edna and I came to depend on that in our plans for her, but he did not carry out his promise. Nancy smiled understandingly and made no comment, but she did wonder why Mr. Crowley had changed his mind. Josiah went to live with some other cousins. After that, things changed. He rarely came to see us, but he was here just last February and said the same thing, that Edna and I were to inherit money from him. He had always helped us, and it seems strange that he should stop so suddenly. Mary Turner looked at Nancy. Maybe you know our well-to-do cousins that he went to stay with. They live in River Heights. They're the Richard Tophams. Do they have two daughters named Ada and Isabel? Nancy asked. If so, I know them. That's the family, all right, replied Mary. Nancy detected a hint of coolness in the woman's voice. Do you like those two girls? Miss Turner asked. Nancy did not answer at once. She had been taught never to gossip, but finally she said, tactfully, Ada and Isabel were in high school with me. They were never my close friends. We, didn't see eye to eye on various things. By this time, Mary Turner had selected a few items from the first aid chest. Now she went to the refrigerator for some ice cubes. As she arranged the various articles on a tray, she said, Well, when Cousin Josiah passed away, to our amazement, Richard Topham produced a will which made him executor of the Crowley estate, and left all the money to him, his wife, and the two girls. Yes, I did read that in the newspaper, Nancy recalled. Is the estate a large one? I understand there's considerable money in it, Mary Turner replied. Some of Josiah's other cousins say he told them the same thing he told us, and they are planning to go to court about the matter." The woman shrugged. "But I guess a fight to break the will would be hopeless. Nevertheless, Edna and I cannot help feeling there must be a later will, although as yet no one has presented it." Nancy followed Miss Turner into the living room. The cold compress helped to reduce the swelling where Judy had hit her head on a rock. Convinced now that the little girl was all right, Nancy said she must leave. "Come to see me again soon," Judy spoke up. "I like you, Nancy. You're my saving girl." "You bet I'll come," Nancy answered. "I like you too. You're a good sport." The child's great aunts profusely thanked Nancy again for rescuing Judy. The visitor had barely reached the door when Edna suddenly said, "Mary, where's our silver teapot?" "Why, right there on the tea table." "Oh, it's gone!" Edna ran into the dining room. "The silver candlesticks! They're gone too!" Nancy paused in the doorway, startled. "Do you mean the pieces have been stolen?" she asked. "They must have been," replied Mary Turner, who was white with apprehension. "But those men who bought some furniture from us." "Oh, by those men who bought some furniture from us." Sorry. See, I told you I mess up sometimes. But we all do. Instantly, Nancy thought of the men in the van. "Who were the men?" she asked. "Oh, Mary and I could tell we have been so careless." No, I read that wrong. "Oh, Mary, how could we have been so careless?" Edna Turner wailed. "We don't know who the men were. They just knocked on the door and asked if we had any old furniture that we wanted to sell. We'll never get the silver back." "Maybe you will," said Nancy. "I'll call the police." "Oh dear," Mary said woefully. "Our phone is out of order." "Then I'll try to catch up with the van," Nancy declared. "What did the men look like?" "They were short and heavy-set. One had dark hair, the other light. They had kind of large noses. That's about all I noticed." "Me too," said Edna. With a hasty goodbye, Nancy dashed from the house and ran to her car. That was the end of Chapter 1. Chapter 2. A Missing Will. The blue convertible sped along the country road. Nancy smiled grimly. "I'm afraid I'm exceeding the speed limit," she thought. "But I almost wish a trooper would stop me. Then I could tell him what happened to the poor Turner sisters." Nancy watched the tire marks which the van driven by the thieves had evidently made in the dirt road. But a few miles further on, a feeling of dismay came over her. She had reached a V-shaped intersection of two highways. Both roads were paved, and since no tire impressions could be seen, Nancy did not know which highway the thieves had taken. "Oh dear," she sighed. "Now what shall I do?" Nancy concluded that her wisest move would be to take the road which led to River Heights. There was a state police barracks just a few miles ahead. "I'll stop there and report the theft." She kept looking for the van, which she recalled as charcoal gray. "I wish I'd seen the license number or the name of the firm that owns the van," Nancy said to herself ruefully. When she reached the state police headquarters, Nancy introduced herself to Captain Runcie. That's a weird name. And told about the robbery. giving what meager information she could about the suspects. The officer promised to send out an alarm immediately for the thieves and their charcoal gray moving van. Nancy continued her journey home, thinking of the Turners and their problems. I wonder why Mr. Josiah Crowley left all his money to the Tophams and none to his other relatives. Why did he change his mind? Those Tophams are well-to-do and don't need money as much as the Turners. Nancy did not know Richard Topham, but she was acquainted with his wife, as well as his daughters. They were arrogant and unreasonable, and disliked by many of the shopkeepers in town. Ada and Isabel had been unpopular in high school. They had talked Sorry, I'm sometimes I come across words that I don't know, so it takes me a bit to figure out what it is. Alright. They had talked incessantly, that's what I'm going with, of money and social position, making themselves very obnoxious to the other students. I wonder, Nancy thought, if a way can't be found so the Turners could get a share of the Crowley money. I'll ask Dad. 5 minutes later, Nancy pulled into the double garage and hurried across the lawn to the kitchen door of the Drews' large red brick house. The building stood well back from the street and was surrounded by tall, beautiful trees. "Hello, Nancy," greeted the pleasant, slightly plump woman who opened the door. She was Hannah Gruen, housekeeper for the Drews, who had helped rear Nancy since the death of the girl's own mother many years ago. Nancy gave her a hug, then asked, "Dad home? I see his car in the garage." "Your father's in the living room, and dinner will be ready in a few minutes." Nancy went to say hello to her tall, handsome father, then hurried to wash her hands and comb her hair before the three who formed the Drew household sat down to dinner. During the meal, Nancy related her adventure of the afternoon. "What tricky thieves!" Hannah Gruen burst out. "Oh, I hope the police capture them." "They certainly took advantage of those Turner sisters," Mr. Drew commented. I am not doing a male voice, I am sorry. Yeah, no male impressions here. Mary and Edna are in financial difficulties, Nancy commented. Isn't it a shame that Josiah Crowley didn't bequeath some of his estate to the Turners and other relatives who need the money? Carson Drew smiled affectionately at his only child, then said, "Yes, it is, Nancy. But unless a will written later turns up, that's the way it has to be." "The Turners think there is another will," Nancy told him. "Wouldn't it be wonderful if it can be found?" "I agree," spoke up Hannah. "It's well known in town that Mrs. Topham and her daughters were unkind to Josiah Crowley for some time before he died. Their excuse was that Josiah's eccentricities were extremely trying." I apologize if I'm saying these words wrong. I've just never seen them before. The Tophams have never been noted for any charitable inclinations, Mr. Drew observed with a smile. However, they did give Josiah a home. only because they knew he was going to leave all his money to them," said Hannah. "If I'd been Josiah, I wouldn't have stayed there." The housekeeper sighed. "But when people get old, they don't like change, and probably he put up with things rather than move." She said the treatment the Tophams had accorded old Josiah Crowley had aroused a great deal of unfavorable comment throughout River Heights. Nancy had not known him personally, but she had often seen the elderly man on the street. Secretly, she had regarded him as a rather nice, kindly person. His wife had died in influenza epidemic, and after that he had made his home with various relatives. According to rumors, all these people had admitted that he had paid his board and done many favors for them. They, in turn, had been kind to him, and though poor themselves, had tried to make Josiah Crowley comfortable and happy. "Tell me everything you know about Mr. Crowley," Nancy urged her father. The lawyers said that the old man had publicly declared he intended to provide in his will for relatives and friends. Then 3 years before his death, the Topham family, who had never shown an interest in him, had experienced a sudden change of heart. They had begged Josiah Crowley to make his home with them, and at last he had consented. Shortly after he moved into the Topham house, Mr. Drew was told that the old man had decided to leave all his money to them. Mr. Crowley, though failing in health, maintained a firm grip on life. But as time went on, he became more and more unhappy. He continued to live with the Tophams, but it was whispered about that he frequently slipped away to visit his other relatives and friends, and that he intended to change his will again. "Then there must be a later will," Nancy said hopefully. Mr. Drew nodded and went on. "One day, Josiah Crowley became very critically ill. Just before his death, he attempted to communicate something to the doctor who attended him, but his words, other than will, were unintelligible. After the funeral, only one will came to light, giving the entire fortune to the Tophams." "Dad, do you suppose Mr. Crowley was trying to tell the doctor something about another will, which he had put someplace where the Tophams couldn't find it?" Nancy asked. "Very likely," the lawyer replied. "Probably he intended to leave his money to relatives who had been kind to him, but fate cheated him of the opportunity." "Do you think anybody has looked for another will?" Nancy questioned. "I don't know, but I'm sure of this. If another will shows up, Richard Topham will fight it. The estate is a considerable one." "I understand, and they aren't the kind of people to share good fortune." "Can the present will be contested?" Nancy asked. "I hear that other relatives have filed a claim, declaring they were told another will had been made in their favor. But unless it is located, I doubt that the matter will ever go further." "But the Tophams don't deserve the fortune," Hannah Gruen remarked. "And besides, they don't need the money. It doesn't seem fair." "It may not seem fair, but it is legal," Mr. Drew told her, "and I'm afraid nothing can be done about the situation." "Poor Judy and her aunts," said Nancy. There are others affected in the same way, her father remarked. For instance, 2 young women who live on the river road. I don't know their names. I understand they were not related to Mr. Crowley, but were great favorites of his. They are having a struggle and could use some extra money. Nancy lapsed into silence. That's a hard word to say. I mean, I know it's an easy word, but some people struggle saying it, and that was me. Oh boy. Okay. She felt strongly that a mystery lurked behind the Crowley case. Dad, do you believe Josiah Crowley made a second will? Nancy questioned suddenly. You sound like a trial lawyer. The way you cross-examine me, Mr. Drew protested, but with evident enjoyment. To tell the truth, Nancy, I don't know what to think. But something did happen which might indicate that Mr. Crowley at least intended to make another will. Please go on, Nancy begged impatiently. Well, one day, nearly a year ago, I was in the First National Bank when Crowley came in with Henry Rolstead. The attorney who specializes in wills and other estate matters? Nancy inquired. Yes, I had no intention of listening to their conversation, but I couldn't help overhearing a few words that made me think they were discussing a will. Crowley made an appointment to call at Rolstead's office the following day. Oh, Nancy cried excitedly. That looks as though Mr. Crowley had made a new will, doesn't it? But why didn't Mr. Rolstead say something about Excuse me. But why didn't Mr. Rolstead say something about it at the time of Mr. Crowley's death? For one of many reasons, Mr. Drew replied. In the first place, he may never have drawn a new will for Mr. Crowley. And even if he had, the old man might have changed his mind again and torn it up. Before Nancy spoke again, she finished the delicious apple pudding which Hannah had made. Then she looked thoughtfully at her father. Dad, Mr. Rolstead is an old friend of yours, isn't he? Yes, an old friend and college classmate. Then won't you please ask him if he ever drew up a will for Mr. Crowley or knows anything that might solve this mystery? That's a rather delicate question, young lady. He may tell me it's none of my business. You know he won't. You're such good friends. He'll understand why you're taking a special interest in this case. Will you do it, please? I know you like to help people who are in trouble, her father said. I suppose I could invite Mr. Rolstead to have lunch with me tomorrow. Wonderful, Nancy interrupted eagerly. That would be a splendid opportunity to find out what he knows about a later will. All right, I'll try to arrange a date. How about joining us? Nancy's face lightened up as she said, Oh, thank you, Dad. I'd love to. I hope it can be tomorrow so we won't have to waste any time trying to find another will. Mr. Drew smiled. We? He said. You mean you might try to find a hidden will if Mr. Crowley wrote one? I might. Nancy's eyes sparkled in anticipation. And that was the end of chapter 2. Get a bookmark here. There. Alright. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed the first installment of reading Nancy Drew, The Secret of the Old Clock. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, share, and suggest anything you want me to do in the future. As long as it's not inappropriate. And as long as it's reasonable. Alright. And I will see you guys in the next one. Love you, Dream Chasers.